I'm turning the tables now for all of you, a little audience participation. I would like you to take a stab at some of the introduction notes that I have for Roger Altizer. As you saw this morning, I eschewed the academic approach to introducing all of our scholars, instead went for something a little more laid back and entertaining. So let me entertain your interpretations of this afternoon's presenter's emoji and give me a little backstory here. What do you think? How might you interpret these? Go ahead.
Hawaiian shirt.
Hawaiian shirts, yes. Roger Altizer has a wonderful collection of Hawaiian shirts, none of which he's wearing today.
It's so sad. It's so sad. I'm required by contract to wear the colors.
And he specified to me that he only gets those with coconut shell buttons, so very authentic. All right, where are we going next here? Somebody else?
Does he do something with the lambada, the forbidden dance?
This is a good one.
Oh, yeah.
I think Lambada was probably involved in this, absolutely. Anyone want to take a deeper guess on that? All right, so we're referring to this emoji combination down here. Roger was challenged to a dance-off in Vegas and spectacularly lost.
I lost.
That's true. All right, anyone else? We got a few more up there. Jump on in. What do we think about this combination here? I think it's pretty obvious.
This is pretty obvious.
We're getting warmer. Yes, that's right.
No, not yet. Not yet.
Yeah. Roger has a frequent flyers card for cruises and readily admits that the major draw is the all-you-can-eat dining on these cruises.
It's just
right.
true.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So I also asked Roger what his favorite video games were as a child, and so those are represented in the middle column there. Can anyone tell me what they had? Donkey Kong and Ms. Pac-Man. Yes, exactly. This morning's presenters, we talked about the fact that they had something in common, 2 dogs per family. So we also have an animal in the home here. Roger is the loving owner of a cat with just one eye named One-Eye Jack. All right, and of course the last emoji actually captures him in his professional duties. So Roger is, I'm going to actually get the official titles right. Hold on. My computer went to sleep. You are the executive director?
So many
Something
things.
like that.
So many
Well, so he's one of the directors, one of the founding members of the Entertainment Arts and Engineering program here on campus, which is co-offered between the College of Fine Arts and the College of Engineering Computer Science departments, and is housed in about 4 different buildings on campus and currently changing locations as we speak. In March, they're going to be moving down to the old law library space. And he is also the director of digital medicine at the Center for Medical Innovation up in Health Sciences. Is your office actually located up in the Health Sciences Library, or one of your offices?
One of my offices is in the Health Sciences Library in Nichols,
if you have not had a chance to take a look at their work and visit their spaces, I'm sure that Roger will not only point you to them, but invite you to come and visit their spaces. All right, and with no further ado, Roger Altizer.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, buddy. That was certainly the most creative introduction I've ever had, so hats off to you.
Are we on laptop 1 or 2?
One of them.
Laptop 2. There we go.
Perfect, thanks. All righty, so looks like we're all up and running. Before we get started, I want to give a couple of thank yous. I've been at the U since 2003. I was only intending on spending 2 years here, but you know how that goes. And so now I've been here quite a long time. But all of the libraries here have had a profound impact both on my education and my work. So I practically wrote my dissertation in study carols at the Quinney. I have taught classes in the Eccles, here in the Marriott, and took a lot of advantage of the Second Life Island that used to exist here at the Marriott. And now I have a lab up at the Eccles. So librarians and libraries have been a big part of everything that I've done. and to be frank, couldn't have been done without it. All right, so let's talk about a couple of things today. We want to talk about games, of course. It's what I'm generally known for talking about. And then we also want to talk about some ideas about innovation about where games could be going and how it affects learning. One of the things I don't want to do today is talk about educational games very much. I'm sure you've seen a lot of educational games. Educational games aren't a new concept. How many people here have played Oregon Trail? Right? Like they're still making Oregon Trail, right? You can die from dysentery on your iPhone. And what's hilarious about it is now you can pay 99 cents to be resurrected once you die from dysentery. So it's keeping up with the market about the way things are operating today. But we're going to talk about a few different things. I'm going to talk about entertainment, arts, and engineering a little bit while I'm up here. Being that we're on campus, some people always have questions about it, so I'll fly through that before we get to the content. All right, so EAE, as was introduced, is an interdisciplinary program here on campus. Focuses largely on games and is sort of known for being top ranked. And people always ask us, how did you get there? We partner with lots of people on campus and off campus. That's the real secret to all of our success and to being the #1 games program in the nation. And then we sort of have this secret sauce of providing 3 really distinct experiences. We focus really heavily on student-led projects, so this sort of embodied learning that they do. Great academic courses, which is sort of the thing that universities are great at. And then we sort of steal a page from medicine, actually, where we say socialization and skills should be taught in a professional manner. So the way that students learn technology skills is actually by working with active professionals in the industry. And while they learn Photoshop and Maya and all those great skills, the bigger part of that is the socialization, learning how to be a professional, and even if you want to be a professional, sort of comes from rubbing elbows with those folk. In the last couple of years, my work has changed pretty significantly. So, we have an extra N in our title. So ThenGApp Lab, which stands for the Therapeutic Games and Apps Lab, is our lab up in the Eccles Health Sciences Library. And let me see here if I can remember how to turn down the volume on this thing, because my music is going to be nowhere near as good as everybody else's. All right, I think I can do it right. Which one is it, you think? Program, probably great. All right, excellent. And we have a little video on the type of work that we're doing up there. I'm just going to mute it. Bam, let's see if that works. And we will start it. Bam, there we go. All right, so the ThenGApp Lab, we're celebrating our 2nd year in January, and we have done about 24 projects now, just over $2 million in sponsored research. And every semester we have about 35 graduate students who are funded working up in the lab. They work on everything from assistive devices for people who have spinal cord injuries. So this is a video game that you can control with a joystick or a straw that also allows you to control an actual ski chair as well. We've done the same thing with a kayak. And so if you are disabled and can't use your arms and legs, we've developed both sports equipment with our friends over in medicine, as well as simulators that allow you to learn how to use it, right? So in this case, we have games helping people be more able. We've worked with the Natural History Museum on critical thinking games that involve paleontology. This is Dino Lab, which is currently being tested in schools all across Utah. It's actually a lot prettier of a game right now, but this is an older version and it still looks all right. Students build dinosaurs and learn critical thinking skills from building those dinosaurs. Veincraft is a game we built with the nursing school where sepsis and infections gained in the hospital actually kill more people every year than auto accidents, if you can believe it. And so this is a game that helps people learn modern techniques about how to insert PICC lines, IVs, things like that, so you don't get an infection while you're in the hospital. And it's a prototype, so it's still a little rough looking, but it's really built on modern sort of techniques about doing this. Reflex Speed was built with a researcher here at the U that developed an entirely new method of increasing people's reaction speeds. This is a game that's actually being used by the Seattle Mariners right now and may be rolled out in the MLB here in the very near future. And then finally, Colleague. This is probably the most fun project to talk about, even though it's not the prettiest one. This is Tinder for researchers. So this will be going live here in a couple of months, and it helps researchers find collaborators on campus much more simply. They simply swipe left if they don't want to work with somebody. And then finally, Bad Air Day is a game where the decisions you make affect the air quality in Salt Lake, and you actually have inversion in the game. And the goal is to teach students about all the different kinds of things, decisions that make all of that happen.
Can we send that to the legislature?
What's that?
Can we send that to the legislature?
Yeah, they actually help partially fund it. So we're hoping that they'll actually start to use the things they pay for, right? That's our goal. We're totally being recorded, so I shouldn't say this. As a side note, we actually decided that we were better off tackling tomorrow's leaders. And so it was a conscious decision not to make something for the general public and instead make something for high school students, because we thought we still had a hope there, right? So, maybe you'll breathe well the day after tomorrow. Maybe, that's kind of our goal. All right, so one of the things I want to talk about real quick is simulations and games, of course, and sort of what the differences are between those and what are some ways that we're sort of doing new things in that space. All right, the image on your left is of an IED simulator. So this sort of represents the traditional kind of thing the military and other people have done for a very long time. You have a very specific skill you want to train somebody in. You can't make them do that skill, for example, like how to survive an IED explosion. That's just not something you want to go through in real life, so they make simulators to simulate that. So this is at Fort Bliss, and I was doing a tour, and they gave me the chance to sit in that and have it happen, and when I watched it, I said, there's just no way in hell I am climbing in that contraption. Essentially what it does is it simulates an explosion, and the whole Humvee flips, and the people inside get all banged around, and it's just a dismal looking experience, to be honest. But the idea is they've proven that if you go through the simulator, you have something like a 60% more likelihood of surviving an explosion from an IED in Afghanistan or Iraq than you do if you didn't get the training on the simulator. And those kind of simulators exist for a wide variety of things. On the other side, we have a game. This is a game that I worked on a number of years ago called the Patient Empowerment Game. And that's a game for children who are fighting cancer. One of the problems we decided to tackle, it tackles two very distinct problems. The first one is empowerment, that people who believe they can beat their disease have a higher likelihood of beating their disease. But the second one is physical activity. So children get their physical activity through play, right? Running around, playing with other people. That's how you get your exercise. It is tough to play in the hospital, right? Nobody likes you running around, right? Frequently you might have an IV attached to you. It's just not a very conducive place that's conducive to play. So what we did was we developed a system that did upper body cardiovascular activity. So you can move your arms fast enough and strong enough to sort of work up a sweat and get that heart rate going. We designed it so it worked for people who are sitting down or standing up, had IVs in their arms, and even for, sadly, for amputees, for children who have been amputated. So the game is a great game, and it's tons of fun, and it really illustrates something very similar. They're both based in reality. So one is simulating blowing up things, and it's military stuff is complicated, so it simulates what it simulates. But on the other side, the game that they're playing is actually about recycling. The reason it is a recycling game, so you have these controllers that you use and you throw garbage into the appropriate recycling bin, right? So that doesn't sound like a terribly exciting game, right? It is actually part of a collection of 4 different mini games. They get to do things like throw a whale to the moon and smash robot crabs with a hammer and rescue babies off a runaway carousel. And oddly enough, recycling was the hit game, right? Yeah, I know, it's not something I would have assumed either. But it actually came out from research. So I did a bunch of interviews with social workers who work with the children themselves, and they did a lot of field research in the rooms of children to get the themes and ideas and designs behind the game. So when we design things, we actually don't start with an idea, we start with a question, and then we do research around that question, and then the idea is that the right solution will emerge from that idea. So rather than being my crazy idea that I come up with, we say, look, let's let the people who are actually going to use this game come up with the idea, and then we'll figure out how to make it great. That's where our creativity comes in. So one of the things that they talked about a lot was, I am tired of feeling special, right? Everything in my life is special. I just want to feel normal. I can't touch trash. All my friends get to throw away stuff and learn about recycling and how to influence the world, and I don't get to. And so we said, oh, well, all right, if that's your fantasy, we can accommodate that, right? And so we did, and oddly enough, it was both a tear-jerking moment when they loved it, but also sort of showed the value of good design in these things. But they also illustrate 2 very different goals. One is, we want you to learn a specific skill and do that skill a specific way. And the other one is about play. While it is a serious game and there are things we want you to do, we want you to work up a sweat, We want you to understand that you can beat this disease. You have a whole, much more room to be creative in how you approach that, right, and how you play. So there are simulation and there are games, and there are things that are related between them. And then there are things that are very, very different between them. So depending on who you ask, both these things could be called a simulation or could be called a game. So the thing on the left is a flight simulator. And flight simulators in America are really interesting for a number of reasons. They are absurdly expensive, right? And so you can see $25 million price tags on a flight simulator. People don't even blink at that these days. And they're governed by our government. So the FAA actually has requirements for what happens in a flight simulator. Things like you have to be able to see virtually 250 miles. It can't flicker. If it flickers at all, the whole simulator gets decommissioned and somebody gets in trouble for it, right? So all these rules and regulations, things like if on a commercial flight sim, you can actually go from flying the simulator to your first time flying a jet being with passengers, right? So that should make you feel safe, right? Usually you're a co-pilot of some sort. There's a more experienced pilot with you. But the idea being that you can go from these simulators are so good in mind to the FAA that you can go from simulator to flying passengers and you're good to go, especially when you're talking about big birds like the 777 and all those kinds of things. The image on the right is of a young man enjoying a simulator in an IKEA chair that we've all probably owned at one point in our shameful lives. And believes that's a simulation, right? Has that Logitech joystick or Logitech steering wheel in front of him. It provides a little bit of force feedback when you go in the turns. It fights you a little bit, right? And is playing the game Gran Turismo, which is a racing game, right? So, he would refer to it as a simulated experience. It might even talk about how real it is, right? Super realistic. When you look at it from behind him, clearly not realistic. This is not what it's like to be a Formula One race car driver, right? By any stretch of the imagination. I don't even know if he's wearing shoes. I think he's barefoot. So he's operating the pedals barefoot. I mean, they won't let you do that in an F1 car. They make you wear the little booties. It's just not going to happen. But at the same time, he has a degree of realism that's acceptable to him. It's believable, right? And that's what really matters to consumers, is this thing believable? And then also, he believes he's being simulated. The people in the aircraft simulator, they frequently wish they could be more playful, right? They wish, even in the simulators, they're not allowed to do zany things. So if they wanted to, for example, try to do a loop-de-loop in a 747, right? Expressly forbidden. Every minute in the simulator is regulated, right? So you can't go in there and goof around, and try and land in Moab or anything crazy like that, right? You gotta take all of that pretty seriously. So the difference between the two are, while they both might have reality components or sort of realistic components in them, the idea of play versus learning is sort of a dichotomy, and I would argue it's a bit of a false dichotomy. One of the things that we notice with simulations, though, is that tradition is really old. Not that it's a bad tradition, but the idea is let's mimic reality, right? And that's how people are going to learn, is through mimicking reality. And we have questions about what actually is happening when you're doing things with games and when you're doing things with sims. So we have our first FMRI data of people playing video games. And so this is really cool stuff, right? So we're getting all sorts of great biological and physiological information about what happens while you're playing a game. So this is somebody playing a game on your left and watching a game being played on your right. These scans are also very similar to somebody playing a game versus reading a book or watching a movie, right? And so we know that the brain is just on fire when you're playing. Oh, by the way, this comes from the game Remission. Remission is another game that is designed to help children fight cancer and is one of the most studied games ever made. The image on the left is on fire, and the image on the right, there are some things happening. Some of that on the left is free, right? The fact that you're moving your fingers and your hands requires motor skill, and that's going to require some use of the brain that isn't required when you're, say, reading a book, except for when you're flipping a page or when you're sitting there watching a video, right? But we also know that the hypothalamus and your reward centers are just going like crazy when you play a game. And again, the reason why is not what people thought it was. The reason why is because you are making decisions and there's a feedback based on that decision happening rapidly. So it almost doesn't matter. Like, people have spent a lot of time saying, oh, what's great about games? Is it the story, the rescuing of insert prince or princess, or defeating a kingdom, or buying a car, whatever the fantasy is in a game. And actually, it turns out that what really excites the brain is when you press left on the D-pad or on a joystick and Mario runs left, your brain is tickled yellow, right? It just loves that. It says, oh, I want that thing to go left. I pressed this button, it went left. Like your brain's all excited when that kind of stuff happens. And that doesn't happen with movies, right? With movies, you might anticipate things, but there's no sense of agency. And the mind loves doing that kind of thing. And as a result, we know that things happen different in the mind when you're playing, when you're making decisions about what should happen, and then seeing what happens, right? This starts to sound a whole lot like the scientific method, doesn't it, right? That you want to build a hypothesis and try something out and then see what happens. That loop is happening constantly in play, whether it's a video game or whether it's sports, right? Oddly enough, less so in simulation. And the reason for that is because you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, and you're not making decisions about what could and should happen next as much. So let's give you another example of this kind of thinking in action. All right, so anxiety and depression are bad, right? So these are not good things. And by 2020, some people argue that depression is going to be the biggest medical problem that we face in America, right? That right now it's second in terms of cost burden in America, but there's arguments that it's going to go first, right? That's going to be that depression and depression-related things are going to be more expensive than cancer or cardiovascular or a lot of the other kinds of problems that we face in our health systems, as is anxiety. It affects people young and old. It affects both sexes, right? Nobody's immune to this kind of thing, right? It is the second most common disability in people aged 15 to 44 right now. But we have a solution, right? Meds. People love prescribing meds for depression. And meds can be effective, right? And so there are a whole spectrum of different kinds of meds that can help people. Obviously, as everyone knows, meds have side effects. Some of those side effects are not things that people can tolerate. And then more complicated is the fact that only about 25% of the nation has access to this type of medication, especially in any meaningful sort of way. So we have another solution for you. Bejeweled, right? How many people have ever played the game Bejeweled, or more likely the game Candy Crush? Anyone played either of those games? Yeah, those games are massive games, right? And there's a million of these kinds of games out there, and they all kind of operate on the same premise. In the biz, they call them a match 3 game. You slide things around so that 3 things match. When those 3 things match, they disappear, right? So you put 3 gems in a row, and then they disappear, and more gems appear in its place. Before the smartphone revolution, Bejeweled was one of the most popular games in the nation, and at one point it was selling a copy every 90 seconds, right? And so Bejeweled was everywhere. It was, it was on every device you could think of. It was on TVs. Delta has it in the airplanes, right? You can play Bejeweled, much to the chagrin of the person sitting in front of you. It's a game that is absolutely everywhere. But what's interesting about it is that they've been able to prove that if you play Bejeweled 3 times a week for a minimum of 30 minutes, you receive the same benefit for state and trait anxiety as low-dose Xanax, right? So it's an interesting alternative, right? So the notion is that we can start to study the way games affect people, and we can make prescriptions for games, right? That games, if they are affecting the mind, right, if they're affecting, something's going on there. And if we can, that's how we study drugs as well, right? We do an intervention. We're not quite sure how it affects the mind or the body. We give it to people. We see how it affects the mind or the body. And then we study it more and more. The same is true for Bejeweled and other simple puzzle games. It's not true of all games. Not all games have the same effect. Some games actually increase anxiety. Anyone who's done sort of like fantasy football betting knows that you can have a lot of anxiety because of your games. But we're starting to ask interesting questions about how we can use them. So for example, games as therapy is not a new concept, but new ways of thinking about it are. Traditionally, we've only thought about games as therapy as a distraction, right, to take your mind off of something. But now we're learning that because it operates in the mind differently, that engagement does something for the human body, right? So this is Lieutenant Sam Brown. Sam Brown was burned very, very badly in Afghanistan. and has had to undergo years of burn therapy. Burn therapy is extremely painful. It requires the scrubbing away of skin as it heals, the stretching of scar tissue. It is just not a pleasant experience, right? So traditionally what you do is you give people drugs. You give them morphine, maybe they have visions, maybe they don't. But you give them medications to help them get through the painful experience. What they've done instead is they've created a virtual reality experience that Sam plays, and the play is key. While the VR thing looks really cool, the real thing here that matters is that mouse, right? We've shown movies to people and let them listen to music and sort of said, hey, look over here, and given you a shot, right? That's not a new technique, distraction. But play while you're receiving treatment is new, right? And what's fascinating is people request up to 90% less pain medication when using Snow World and receiving treatment. In fact, Sam Brown requests 0. He undergoes extremely painful treatments and takes 0 medication while doing it. And he used to take quite a bit. And Snow World isn't, I mean, it's a cool game, but it's not that great of a game, right? This is the game. So you throw snowballs at penguins. You know, and that's what you do. And so when the researchers at UW built this, they said, we want it to be cold, we want it to be a game that isn't going to be offensive to people in the medical community, so we can't make it too violent. We want acceptance and uptake, right? And so they created this game. They also cheated. It plays Paul Simon in the background, which I think isn't fair, because they clearly did not pay for that license. But anyways, the act of play while you're receiving treatment seems to be the key to this, right? And we now know that people can take more pain while they play. And that shouldn't be rocket science, right? We know that people play through the pain in sports on a regular basis. But the idea of using that for treatment, and that's a moderately new idea. And virtual reality offers us all sorts of interesting opportunities for experimentation and play. This is Labster. Labster is a virtual science lab, right? And so you put on a VR headset and you get to see this lab and you get to play with all of the things in it. And so in one hand, you might say it's a simulation, right? It looks like reality. All the things function like reality. When you click the little buttons and you mix the things in the beakers, everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. But it's also somewhere where you can play. You can do things there that you wouldn't be able to do in a lab. So in a real lab, a lot of these pieces of equipment are hundreds of thousands of dollars. A lot of the things that you might be mixing could cost hundreds of dollars. And so you could waste a lot of money and get kicked out of your lab pretty quickly, as some graduate students have found, if you mess around with the equipment and do the wrong things with it, right? But here in VR, we say, all right, what if we combine this idea of play? We don't just do simulation and do the right thing the right way, but we allow people to learn through play and experimentation in those environments, right? And VR always looks complicated and expensive, but these days it's changing, right? So Expeditions is Google's new effort using Google Cardboard. Google Cardboard is quite literally a VR system made out of cardboard that you slip your phone into, and it gives you really cheap virtual reality. So the systems themselves cost, and like I got this one free at a conference, that's why it's all branded, right? But you could buy these things retail for as low as $5, and you could spend $15 on them if you want. If they have fancy features like movable lenses, right, where you slide cardboard back and forth. But Google's distributing this all over the place, from Alaska to Africa and everywhere in between, with the idea of taking students on virtual field trips, right? Letting them go places that they wouldn't normally be able to go, and giving instructors tools to point things out. So while your entire class might be looking around wherever they want to go, Machu Picchu, under the ocean, it kind of doesn't matter where they go, the teacher can instruct them and say, hey, look, click, this is the thing I want you to pay attention to. Whether the students do or not, that's an entirely another story. But the idea of moving your body, moving that presence somewhere else, and allowing you to be playful while you're there, right? So people often ask what the future of this kind of stuff is. VR is not new. VR, my goodness, we're on our third wave of VR. So, and it's still got a lot of the same problems with it being expensive or difficult to use. Some people get motion sick. Not everyone sees in stereoscopic vision very well. But some of the barriers are being removed. We've never had it as cheap as this, right? VR has always been in the thousands of dollars, if not tens of thousands of dollars. So to get it down to a consumer price range is sort of a new field. And also, as we are at Utah, it should be noted that one of the places that VR started was here at Utah. So Evans and Sutherland of graphics fame worked on the Sword of Damocles over in engineering back in the 60s, and they were doing the first HMDs back there. Other new technology on the horizon that's going to revolutionize what we see in the classroom, so if we're keeping with the theme of emergent technology, is sort of a new use for virtual reality called augmented reality. So rather than transporting you to another world, can we take elements of virtual worlds and overlay them with where we are now, right? So there are a lot of augmented reality systems out there. This is an ad for the Microsoft HoloLens. The note being that you could wear these glasses, you still see the real world, but there are virtual things transposed over the top of that, right? And there's lots of potential here for educational uses, as well as therapeutic uses and entertainment uses. It's also a lot less isolating. One of the advantages of VR is that you are transported to another world, so you're not where you currently are. You're not in your current body. But AR takes advantage and says, well, hey, we want you to be present. So you can be with other people and still use AR, as opposed to VR tends to be an isolating experience that takes you out of communities and with people. We're seeing another renewed interest in robotics, right? So robotics has never been hotter, especially because we see a whole bunch of different uses of commercial level and consumer level robotics. How many people have seen Paro? So Paro is the little robot that's being held by the nun up in the top corner. Anyone seen Paro? Have anyone watched that that Netflix show Master of None? Yes. Right? Yeah, Paro stars in one of the episodes of Master of None, right? So Aziz Ansari must really like Paro. Paro is a companion robot. So we have all this great research on pet therapy, that bringing pets to people who are sick, that it just does tons of things for the mind, body, and soul. And so they've created virtual pets, not like the little ones from the 90s that looked like phones and calculators, right? But ones that purr and coo and respond to you and learn your voice. And oddly enough, when you give Paro to somebody initially, they go, oh my God, stupid robot seal, right? It's kind of the universal response. But you leave them alone for a couple of hours, and they're talking to Paro and giving Paro their deepest secrets, right? It's shockingly effective. And it's been proven in Japan time and time again, and now we're starting to see them in the West, that these virtual robots are catching on. And of course, robots for telepresence and drug delivery robots. My favorite one is actually the one in the bottom corner, the little turtle there. That little turtle was developed in Korea and is being used in hospitals in America as well. It gets to a topic that's near and dear to me, which is exercise for children in the hospital, right? So this is a robot that allows you to wander around the hospital, and when you get lost, the turtle takes you home, right? And so it tells you, it knows where to go. It's a path-finding robot. It can help people get to and from rooms, but its primary use is hanging out with kids so that kids can wander and explore and get some steps in, and also just be curious like they used to be, right? And then if anyone needs to know where they are, a nurse or doctor, they can click and the turtle says like, oh my gosh, we need to go, right? They're after us. Or it'll just put up a ping and then it'll tell you where the turtle is so people know. There are of course scarier robots out there. The one on the left is a pretty menacing one. That's actually a security robot that's being used in the Silicon Valley right now. And it's an interesting concept, which is this robot wanders around. If it catches you do bad things, it makes sirens and lights, and then you probably end up vandalizing it. But it gets pictures of you vandalizing it, so it can do things to you. And then of course it doesn't look that much different from drug delivery robots, right? Other pieces of emerging technology that are sort of changing the way we engage with systems, and this idea of bringing systems back to us, are all the different wearables and interesting new input devices that move us away from the mouse and keyboard, right? So the Tobii up in the top left is a eye tracker. And I guess there are two things that are important about this, right? First is that commercial off-the-shelf culture has changed the way we interact with technology. We call it COTS culture, commercial off-the-shelf, meaning you could actually buy this thing, it comes in a box, and it's reasonably priced, right? So the Tobii, it costs, around $150 to $300, depending on which one you got. And it's great eye tracking. It's unbelievable how well this thing works. We have this thing up in a clinical study at the Moran Eye Center right now for the treatment of children with lazy eye disorder, and it is just going fantastic. The current way of diagnosing children with lazy eye, which is the #1 ocular disease for children, it's holding up these cards and asking them what they see and how do they see them. And the kids hate it, right? Because going to the doctor is just dismal when you're a kid anyways. And who hates it even more are the clinicians, because kids play. So when the doctor holds up this card and it has a triangle on it and says, hey, so what do you see? And the kid says, your mom. And then the doctor goes, oh, I hate my job, you know. It sort of moves away from that. So we have an automated system that has a little person that runs around and there's some buzzards. And as long as you're looking at the screen at all, it's seeing what's going on with your eyes, right? And then we're hoping to do treatment in the same way. So it's much less painful for all parties involved. The Connect is nothing new. That's the one up in the top right. It's motion controlled, and it works pretty well. Wearables are going to change the way we think about software, not just today, but in the very near future. So the one on the left is the Magic Band. Has anyone ever worn a Magic Band or owned a Magic Band? The Magic Band is super cool and super creepy at the same time. You wear them in the Disney parks, and then everybody knows your name. And so you're like walking around and someone goes like, hey, Raj, and you're like, hey, churro guy. It's me again, right? And it knows who you are. The Apple, and it also does all your fast pass stuff, and you don't need to carry cash, and it's just RFID, right? But they have it sort of synced up all over the parks. And of course, the Apple Watch is the Apple Watch. It tracks your steps and your pulse, and you can do all sorts of little funny things with it. But what is this all for, and what does this all mean? From virtual reality to robots to watches and eye tracking, and I mean, it all just sounds like a bunch of new gizmos, right? It's moving away from abstraction, right? So when we use computers today, we do them abstractly. We have keyboards, right, where we do commands and mice and things like that that don't reflect the way that we think about things. When we think about life and we want to pick something up, we pick something up, right? When you want to ask how someone is doing, you might put your hand on their forehead and see if they're hot, right? So we have a way of dealing with the world that is physical and embodied that technology had to remove because of limitations. And so the big emerging trend of technology is this move back towards embodiment, right? That being in the world, that the technology can conform to being in the world, as opposed to you having to abstract the world for the technology. If you've ever met anyone who has really been on the other side of the digital divide, you know how painful this is. In a past life, when I was in my undergraduate school, I did corporate training. And teaching people what a folder was nearly impossible, right? You get people sitting there with the mouse going, so the folder, how many things fit inside of that folder? Like, how big of a folder are we talking here, right? And you go, well, it's a pretty big folder. You put a whole lot of stuff in there. Like, how many things? Like, how big of a picture can I put in that folder? Like a 6-inch picture? You go, no, man, this is gonna be a rough day, right? But it's because we come up with these metaphors and these devices and these tools that hopefully let us interact with machines that can automate things in ways that help us. And we're stepping back from that, right? So I think what's interesting about all of this is that it's less about new ideas using this technology. We see this technology being used for things we already do, like wayfinding, finding your way back to the room, not new. Getting exercise, not new. Telling stories, not new. Playing games, not new. Simulations, that's the world's first flight simulator. It's a barrel and some wood, and you kind of shake it back and forth to teach people how to operate flight, right? Like we had flight in 1903, and we had like the first flight sim, I think it's like 1907 or 1909, right? So we've had flight simulators for over 100 years, right? So not new, right? But what is new is this idea about getting back to embodiment, engagement, exploration, or what we commonly refer to as play, right? And so we're getting back to a point where knowledge can be abstracted, theories can be abstracted, methods of learning can be abstracted, but the engagement with the technology, well, it's becoming embodied again, right? And I think it's terribly exciting. It's a fun time to be playing with these kinds of toys. All right, that's all I have for you. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I know we're over time, huh? I went too long, didn't I?
No. I just need to get this. If you have questions, we go to the video.
No? Good. Enjoy your Friday afternoon, huh?